Let's dive into one of history's most chilling what-if scenarios. It comes from a novel called The Canvas and the Storm, and it asks a terrifying question. What if the entire 20th century could have been changed by a single word on a single piece of paper?
And this quote, right from the book's opening, it just perfectly captures the unsettling idea we're going to explore. It's this thought that the massive, crashing waves of history don't always start on battlefields or in palaces, but sometimes in the quietest, most forgettable places.
So to really get where we're going, we have to start with what we already know. The real story is one of a young man whose dream of being an artist gets completely crushed. And that rejection sends him down a dark path of resentment, extremism, and, well, a catastrophe that changed the world forever.
But this is where our story takes a hard left turn. We're going to see how the novel imagines a completely different timeline, one that hinges on one critical moment and one single powerful word.
So, picture it. Vienna, October 1907. You've got this 18-year-old kid, Adolf Hitler, full of ambition. He's submitted his work to the famous Academy of Fine Arts. He's broke, he's a nobody, and his entire future is basically hanging on the contents of an envelope.
And here's the change. It's so simple it's almost hard to believe. In our world, the letter he got back had one word on it, rejected. But in the world of The Canvas and the Storm, the letter says accepted. That one word, that's the fork in the road. That's the butterfly effect that changes literally everything.
Okay, so to really appreciate how big of a deal this is, let's just quickly walk down the path that history actually took, the path of rejection.
You see, getting rejected wasn't just a career setback for him. It was a psychological trigger. It threw him into years of poverty in Vienna, living in these crowded men's dorms, soaking in all the toxic political ideas of the time. His huge ambition, now with absolutely nowhere to go, just started to fester. It curdled into this deep, burning resentment that needed a target. It needed a scapegoat.
This quote from the novel just nails it, doesn't it? The core idea is that without the discipline of a real craft to pour himself into, his mind became this breeding ground for hate. It was in that empty space that the monster we know from history started to form.
So now, let's flip the script. Let's walk down that other path, the one from the novel. Let's see how the word accepted builds a completely different person and a completely different world.
In this version of events, one of the examiners, a Professor Rudolf Bacher, looks past all the flawed drawings of people and sees something else. He sees this raw, natural talent for architecture. He calls it structural empathy. He argues that you can't teach someone how to see buildings like that, but you can teach them how to draw people. And, believe it or not, he convinces the committee.
But see, just getting in isn't the whole story. What truly changes him in this alternate reality isn't just the classes, it's the people. It's the daily grind of mentorship and, maybe most shocking of all, friendship. Two people become absolutely key. You've got Professor Bacher, who gives him structure and constantly pushes him to face his weaknesses. And then there's Marcus Weiss, a brilliant Jewish student who becomes not just his intellectual rival, but his closest friend.
You can almost think of Bacher's mentorship as a kind of therapy. I mean, he just lays out Hitler's core problem with his devastating critique. He's basically saying, your art will never be truly great until you're willing to understand the messy, complicated, disappointing world of actual human beings.
And if the professor challenges his mind, Weiss challenges his soul. Look, it's one thing to hear anti-Semitic garbage on the streets. It's a completely different thing to have your best friend, who happens to be Jewish, sit across from you and just tear your work apart with brutal, honest feedback. That constant human connection, that debate, it chips away at his prejudices before they can ever harden into a weapon.
And that, right there, is the psychological turning point. All of that fiery ambition, that desperate need for power and recognition, it gets channeled onto the canvas, not into a political party. The daily struggle of learning a craft and the real friendship he develops, they fill up the mental space where hatred would have otherwise taken root.
So a single person's life is changed. Big deal, right? Well, no. The novel argues that the ripples from this one small change become a historical tidal wave. It completely rewrites the story of the 20th century. Just look at the dominoes that fall. In 1919, he's a war artist coming home to his studio, not a political firebrand. In 1923, the beer hall push still happens, but it's led by some other less effective guy, and it fizzles out. Without its charismatic, fanatical core, the Nazi Party just never gets off the ground. By 1933, Germany is still a mess, but it's a struggling democracy trying to fix itself, not a totalitarian dictatorship.
Now, this is a really crucial point. This alternate world is no paradise. All the ingredients for a disaster are still there in Germany. The economic collapse, the humiliation after the war, the kindling is piled high. The only thing missing is the one specific arsonist willing to light the match.
And that leads us to the most profound, most devastating consequence of this single change in history. It's the sheer, crushing weight of what was avoided.
The argument in the book is that the Holocaust was not an accident. It wasn't just a byproduct of war. It was a deliberate, industrial-scale project, and it required the absolute power and the obsessive, singular will of one person to organize an entire country around the act of mass murder.
Without that one person, that machinery is never built. The camps are never designed for that purpose, which means that in this timeline, 6 million people were not murdered.
They lived. They had families. They got to grow old. The novel calls that the most important sentence in the entire book. It's the gaping absence at the heart of our own history, and the living, breathing presence at the heart of this one.
And that's the ultimate takeaway, isn't it? The story argues that the greatest horrors in our world aren't destiny. They're the result of choices, of circumstances, of doors that open and doors that slam shut. The monster was not inevitable. He was made. Which leaves us all with a final, really unsettling thought. If one man's catastrophe wasn't set in stone, if it really could have been diverted by an acceptance letter, a teacher, or a friend, what does that say about the world that fails to provide those things? What responsibility do we have? That's a question that echoes far, far beyond the 20th century.